Michael Turner had grown used to the silence of his small Iowa home. Once filled with laughter, music, and the soft hum of his wife's presence, it now echoed with absence. The nights stretched longer than they should, and mornings carried a dull heaviness he couldn't shake. His son Ethan tried to fill the void with boyish energy, running through the backyard with Max, their golden Labrador, tossing a worn tennis ball again and again. But Michael often stood by the window, hands stuffed in his pockets, lost in thoughts that circled endlessly. How do I raise him alone? How do I keep us moving forward? The Midwest wind rattled the old shutters, carrying with it the smell of cornfields and damp earth. Michael leaned against the counter, staring at the unopened pile of bills. Each envelope pressed down on him like invisible weights. Life insurance had helped at first, but it was running thin. His job at the local lumberyard barely covered the essentials. Still, he forced himself to smile whenever Ethan looked at him. He couldn't let his son see how fragile everything felt. That evening, the phone rang. Michael hesitated before answering, expecting another creditor. Instead, a calm, professional voice informed him of his late Uncle Henry's passing. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, but Michael remembered Henry as a peculiar man who lived a life on the road. The attorney explained that Henry had left something for him. Not land, not money, an old bus. A school bus, to be exact, rusting away in a barn outside of town. Michael let out a breathless laugh, caught between disbelief and irritation. A bus? What am I supposed to do with a bus? Ethan's ears perked up. A bus? Like a real one? Can we see it, Dad? His eyes glowed with the kind of wonder only a 10-year-old could muster. Michael shook his head, rubbing the back of his neck. It's probably just junk, old metal, nothing worth our time. But Ethan pressed on. Uncle Henry must have had a reason, right? Maybe he wanted us to have it for something special. Michael didn't know how to respond. The thought of Henry leaving behind a relic didn't surprise him. The man had always been eccentric, filling conversations with half-finished stories about road trips, strange towns, and the people he met along the way. Yet, what unsettled Michael was why him? Why would Henry think a broken-down bus could help a struggling widower? Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep with Max curled beside him, Michael sat at the kitchen table, the room lit only by the dim glow of a single bulb. He thought about his wife, about the life they once planned together. Family vacations, laughter-filled evenings, a future brimming with hope. That future now felt like sand slipping through his hands, and yet Henry's gift stirred a faint spark of curiosity. He whispered into the empty room, "What are you trying to tell me, Henry?" The question lingered without answer. Michael finally stood, walked down the hallway and checked on Ethan. The boy slept soundly, his hand resting on Max's fur. Watching them, Michael's chest tightened. If the bus meant something, anything that could give Ethan hope, maybe it was worth the drive to see it. The next morning, Michael made a decision. He would take Ethan to the barn, let him look at the so-called treasure his uncle had left behind. He doubted it would change their circumstances, but perhaps it would give his son a moment of excitement in a life lately clouded by loss. "Tomorrow," he muttered, turning off the light. "Tomorrow we'll see what kind of legacy a rusty old bus can hold." And though he didn't yet know it, that decision would unravel a chain of events far greater than he could imagine. But before we step deeper into Michael's journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories like these, filled with resilience, mystery, and unexpected turns, await you here, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Michael had no idea that what began with a dusty phone call and a laughable inheritance would soon turn into a discovery that could alter his and Ethan's lives forever. The drive to the barn felt longer than it really was. Iowa's flat fields stretched endlessly on either side of the narrow road, yellow stalks of corn swaying under the late morning sun. Dust kicked up from the gravel beneath Michael's worn pickup, coating the windshield in a faint haze. Ethan leaned against the window, his face pressed close, searching for the first glimpse of their inheritance. Max sat between them, tail thumping nervously with each bump in the road. "Do you think it'll still run?" Ethan asked, his voice bright with curiosity. Michael gave a half smile, though his eyes stayed on the road. "If it does, I'll be shocked." Buses don't just sit around for decades and start up like nothing happened. Ethan shrugged, undeterred. Maybe Uncle Henry fixed it before he… you know. Maybe it's waiting for us. Michael didn't respond. The boy's hopefulness cut through him. He wanted to protect Ethan from disappointment, but he also didn't want to crush the spark in his eyes. When they finally pulled onto a dirt path leading to a weathered barn, Michael slowed the truck. The structure leaned like a tired man, boards grayed from years of storms. Vines crawled along its sides, and one of the sliding doors hung crookedly from rusted hinges. Ethan nearly bounced in his seat. "There! Dad! It's in there! I know it!" Michael parked, letting the engine sputter to silence. As they stepped out, the smell of damp wood and hay drifted toward them. Max darted ahead, nose twitching, tail wagging furiously. Michael grabbed the heavy door and heaved it open with a metallic groan. Sunlight spilled inside, illuminating dust particles that floated like tiny ghosts in the air. And there it was. The bus sat in the center of the barn, a hulking figure swallowed by time. Its yellow paint had faded to a dull mustard, peeling in strips that revealed patches of rust beneath. Windows were either cracked or clouded with dirt. The tires sagged flat against the ground, and the once proud grille now looked like a mouth missing too many teeth. Ethan gasped, his small voice echoing, "It's beautiful." Michael blinked, certain they were seeing two different things. "Beautiful? Son, it looks like it should have been hauled to the junkyard years ago." But Ethan ran forward, brushing his hand along the metal side. "It's got character, like it's been waiting for us." Max circled the bus, sniffing, then barked twice, as though confirming Ethan's excitement. Michael shook his head, stepping closer. He peered through one of the grimy windows and saw the inside lined with torn vinyl seats, some springs poking out, others covered in bird droppings. Nests clung to the ceiling corners, and an old, mouldy blanket rested on the driver's seat. He sighed heavily. From behind him, a voice called out, "Looks like you got stuck with old Henry's project." Michael turned to see Harvey Miller, the town's mechanic, leaning against the barn door frame. A cap shaded his weathered face, and grease stained his hands, as always. "You knew about this?" Michael asked. Harvey chuckled. "Everybody knew Henry kept his bus here. Man was obsessed with it. He used to tell me he'd take it cross-country one last time. Guess he never got around to it." Michael gestured toward the vehicle. "Be honest with me, Harvey. Is it worth anything?" The mechanic walked around it slowly, running his hand along the dented metal. After a long pause, he said, "Depends what you mean by worth. Sentimental value? Sure. Road value. Not unless you've got more money and patience than sense. Restoring this thing would cost a fortune." Ethan's smile faltered, but only for a second. "But maybe we don't need to fix it up all at once. We can work on it little by little, right, Dad?" Michael rubbed his temples. He wanted to be practical, to tell Ethan the truth that they couldn't afford to waste a dime. Yet something in his son's voice made him hesitate. Harvey shrugged. "If you ask me, best thing you can do is strip it for parts or sell it for scrap. Otherwise, it's just going to sit here, collecting dust like it always has." Michael didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the rusty frame, on the peeling paint that seemed to whisper stories of miles once traveled. Against his better judgment, a thought began to take root. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe there was something about this relic that deserved another look. But for now, all he could do was close the barn door and leave the question of what to do with the bus for another day. That night, Michael drove the bus from the barn to his property, ignoring the puzzled looks from neighbors as he parked the bulky machine on a patch of dirt near the garage. It hadn't run on its own, of course. Harvey had hitched his tow truck to it and grumbled the whole way, but now it stood in the Turner yard like an oversized relic from another time. Ethan's excitement had not dimmed once. He darted in and out of the house, tugging on Max's collar, pointing at the bus as if it were some kind of magical castle waiting to be discovered. Michael, however, felt only exhaustion. He stood with his arms crossed, staring at the faded paint and broken windows. To him, it wasn't a castle. It was a reminder of yet another responsibility dumped in his lap, one he hadn't asked for. By the time he pulled Ethan inside and made sure his son washed up for bed, the night air had already cooled. A soft chorus of crickets filled the silence. Inside the small house, Michael tried to relax in his recliner with the hum of the television in the background. Yet his mind kept circling back to Henry. Why leave him the bus? Why not sell it, scrap it, or pass it to someone else? There had to be a reason, but Michael was too tired to think anymore. He finally shut off the TV, checked on Ethan, and slipped into bed himself. Before dawn, Max stirred first. The dog padded around the room, ears twitching. Then he trotted to the back door and scratched lightly, letting out a low whine. Michael grunted from under the blanket, but Max didn't quit. Soon the scratching grew frantic, and a bark tore through the stillness of the morning. "Max, what is it?" Michael muttered, rubbing his eyes. Ethan came stumbling into the hall, hair sticking out in all directions. "Dad, he wants to go outside." Michael sighed. "Fine. Go on, let him out. Then get back to bed." But Max didn't just want to stretch his legs. The dog bolted straight across the yard, nose to the ground, heading for the bus. He barked once, sharply, then pawed at the steps leading inside. Ethan, already wide awake now, rushed after him. "Dad! He's found something!" Michael groaned, but followed, his bare feet chilled by the damp grass. "It's probably a raccoon or a squirrel." Ethan climbed up the steps, Max at his heels, both of them eager. Inside, the stale smell of mildew hit hard, mixing with the faint trace of rust and old leather. Ethan coughed but pressed forward, tugging at his dad's sleeve. "Look, Dad, he's scratching at the floor." Sure enough, Max had stopped near the middle row of seats. His paws scraped at the boards beneath, nails clicking against metal. His body quivered with determination, his bark echoing in the hollow bus. Michael frowned. He crouched, running his hand over the floor. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed one board didn't sit flush with the others. Its edge lifted slightly, almost invisible unless you looked close. Ethan's eyes widened. Is it like a secret compartment?" Michael pressed the board with his palm, testing it. It wobbled faintly. His pulse quickened against his better judgment. Could just be rot. These floors have seen decades of weather. But Ethan shook his head. "No, Max wouldn't act like this unless there's something important. Right, boy?" The dog barked again as if in agreement, tail wagging furiously. Michael straightened, staring down at the uneven plank. He wanted to dismiss it, to write it off as nothing but decay, yet the intensity in Max's behavior gnawed at him. Dogs didn't obsess over wood for no reason. Something was there. He glanced at Ethan, who was nearly vibrating with excitement. "All right," Michael said slowly. "Maybe we'll take a closer look later today." Ethan grinned. "You promise?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." As they stepped out of the bus into the pale light of morning, Michael couldn't shake the unease stirring in his gut. His uncle's gift had felt like a burden, but now it felt like it was hiding something more, and Max, loyal as ever, had made sure they didn't miss it. The morning air still clung with coolness when Michael returned to the bus, crowbar in hand. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Max's determined scratching, heard Ethan's hopeful voice. Logic told him it was just a loose plank, nothing more. But logic hadn't stopped his thoughts from racing through the night. Ethan trailed behind him, practically skipping, Max bounding beside him. "You really think there's something in there, Dad?" Michael glanced at his son's eager face and sighed. "I think we won't know until we check. Could be nothing. Could just be rot, like I said." "But what if it's not?" Ethan pressed, his eyes wide. "What if Uncle Henry left it on purpose?" Michael pushed open the creaking bus door, the stale smell hitting them again. Dust swirled in the slant of sunlight pouring through a cracked window. He stepped carefully down the aisle, stopping at the spot Max had clawed at the day before. Sure enough, the plank seemed even looser now, its edge raised just enough to slip the crowbar beneath. Max barked once, as if urging him on. Michael knelt, bracing the bar against the wood. His muscles strained, the metal groaning in protest. Then, with a sharp crack, the board gave way. Splinters scattered across the floor. Beneath the plank was a narrow cavity, barely large enough for a shoebox, and inside, wedged tightly, was a metal container. Ethan gasped. Dad, it's a treasure box. Michael didn't answer at first. He reached down, fingers brushing against the cool steel. The box was small, rectangular, heavy in a way that suggested it carried more than just dust. Its surface was scuffed and spotted with rust, but the latch remained intact, locked, stubborn, refusing to open by hand. He set it on one of the bus seats, and both he and Ethan stared at it. "Think there's money inside?" Ethan whispered. Michael shook his head. "Could be anything. Tools, papers, junk your uncle forgot about. Don't get your hopes too high." Ethan leaned closer, almost pressing his nose to the box. "It looks important." "Why else would he hide it?" Michael rubbed his jaw, torn between practicality and curiosity. Every instinct told him to keep his guard up, yet his hands itched to know. "Well, we can't open it without the right tools. Lock's too strong." "Then we'll open it later, right?" Ethan said quickly, almost pleading. "Yeah," Michael admitted, his voice low. "We'll open it later." Silence fell for a moment, broken only by Max's nails tapping against the metal floor as he circled the find. Michael's chest tightened. He hadn't felt this mix of apprehension and anticipation in years. Something about that box felt deliberate, intentional, like his uncle had wanted it discovered this way, at this moment. Ethan finally broke the quiet. "Do you think Uncle Henry meant for you to find it? Maybe it's a message." Michael forced a chuckle, though unease lingered in his tone. Henry wasn't exactly the type to leave messages. He was more the type to spin half a story and disappear before you heard the end. "But maybe this is the end," Ethan said softly. Michael looked at his son, seeing the earnest hope in his eyes. For Ethan, the bus wasn't just rust and ruin. It was an adventure, a chance to hold on to something bigger than the grief they'd carried. He placed a hand on the box, the weight of it grounding him. "Whatever's inside, we'll face it together." Max barked again, sharp and insistent, as though seconding the vow. Michael carried the box down the steps, the morning sun catching its rough surface. The air smelled of fresh earth, and a faint breeze tugged at his shirt. He felt the smallest flicker of something unfamiliar, something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. It felt dangerously close to hope. Michael placed the locked box on the kitchen table that afternoon, its presence dominating the small room. The metal looked dull in the overhead light, but to Ethan it gleamed like buried treasure. Max lay at his feet, tail sweeping across the floor every time Ethan leaned closer. "Can we open it now?" Ethan asked, practically bouncing in his chair. Michael folded his arms. "We'll need better tools. It's not the kind of lock you break with a kitchen knife." "Then we'll get tools," Ethan replied eagerly. "Harvey probably has something, right?" Michael exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the box. Something about it had stirred memories he hadn't visited in years. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as his mind drifted. He remembered being a boy, maybe 10 or 11, sitting in the back of Henry's truck as it rumbled down a dirt road. Henry had always been larger than life, with wild hair and louder laughter, the kind of man who turned every trip into a story. Michael's parents had dismissed him as irresponsible, a drifter with no sense of direction. But to young Michael, Henry was the only adult who seemed to understand that adventure mattered. One evening stood out above the rest. They had camped near a lake in Minnesota, stars spread across the sky like diamonds scattered by hand. Henry had pulled out a battered notebook and scribbled under the glow of a lantern. Michael had asked what he was writing. Henry's reply had been simple. "Maps of places no one else bothers to see. Memories disappear if you don't trap them on paper." The memory tugged at him now, almost painfully. "Dad?" Ethan's voice pulled him back. "You okay?" Michael blinked, realizing he'd drifted. "Yeah, just thinking about your uncle." "What was he like?" Ethan asked. Michael rubbed his chin. "He was different. Restless. He never stayed in one place long, but he had a way of making you believe the world was bigger than the problems in front of you. He carried odd things everywhere he went, maps, postcards, even old coins he picked up at gas stations and flea markets. Half the time I didn't know if he was joking when he said they'd be worth something someday." Ethan's eyes widened. "Coins. Do you think that's what's inside the box?" Michael shrugged. Could be, or it could be just another one of his unfinished stories. Henry wasn't good at finishing things. He left people hanging, wondering what the point was. "But maybe this is the point," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. Michael studied his son's face. There was something in Ethan's expression that reminded him of Henry, an openness to possibility, a refusal to give up before knowing the truth. "I remember once," Michael said softly. "He took me to a coin show in Des Moines. I thought it was boring at first, just tables of metal discs. But Henry, he treated every piece like it carried history in its weight. He told me even the smallest coin could tell you where someone had been, what they'd traded, what they'd valued." Ethan leaned closer, whispering like they were already uncovering secrets. "So maybe these coins are telling us something too." Michael ran his thumb along the edge of the box. He hated to admit it, but his son's words struck him. Henry never did anything without at least a flicker of intention. If he had gone to the trouble of hiding something, perhaps it was more than clutter. "Tomorrow," Michael said firmly, "we'll see about opening it. Tonight, we rest." Ethan groaned, slumping back in his chair. "But Dad—" "No buts," Michael interrupted, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. "We'll need clear heads for whatever's inside." As he carried the box to his bedroom for safekeeping, Michael felt the weight in his hands differently than before. It no longer seemed like just an old piece of metal. It carried the echoes of his uncle's life, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something his own family needed to rediscover. And though Michael tried to bury it, a quiet flicker of anticipation stirred in his chest, stronger than before. The next afternoon, Michael carried the metal box back out to the yard, setting it carefully on the picnic table. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the grass. Ethan trailed behind with Max, practically bouncing on his toes. "You brought the crowbar, right?" Ethan asked eagerly. Michael nodded, laying the tool beside the box. "Crowbar, hammer, and patience. That lock's old, but it's not going to give up without a fight." Ethan grinned. "I bet it's gold, or jewels, or just a bunch of receipts," Michael cut in, trying to temper his son's imagination. Still, his own heart thudded harder than usual. He wedged the crowbar beneath the latch and pressed. The metal squealed, resisting. Michael's arms strained, sweat forming on his brow. With a sudden crack, the lock snapped free, and the lid creaked open, releasing a puff of stale, musty air. Ethan leaned in so close Michael had to hold him back. "Easy, kiddo. Let's see what we've got." Inside, bundles wrapped in old cloth filled the small space. Dust clung to the fabric, leaving streaks on Michael's fingers as he pulled one free. He unfolded it slowly, revealing nothing impressive. Just a stack of yellowed papers, grocery lists, faded receipts, an old postcard from Arizona. Ethan's face fell. "That's it? Just trash?" Michael's stomach sank with disappointment, though he forced his voice steady. "Looks like it." He unwrapped another bundle, this time a handful of rusted tools, their edges corroded and useless. A broken pocket knife, a bent screwdriver, nothing worth keeping. He tossed them onto the table, metal clanking against wood. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Uncle Henry wouldn't hide junk. There has to be something. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. Sometimes people keep things that only mean something to them. Doesn't mean it's treasure. But as he reached for the final bundle, Ethan's hand shot out. "Wait. Let me." Michael hesitated, then nodded. Ethan lifted the cloth carefully, fingers trembling with anticipation. For a moment it looked the same, just scraps of paper, but then, tucked between brittle envelopes, something caught the light. A coin. It slid into Ethan's palm, cool and heavy. The silver gleamed through decades of dust, intricate details still visible. Ethan gasped. "Dad, look at this." Michael leaned closer, his skepticism cracking. The coin wasn't ordinary pocket change. The design was old, elegant, an eagle spreading its wings, the date etched clearly beneath, 1893. Ethan whispered, awe filling his voice. "This has to be worth something." Michael frowned, turning the coin over in his hand. His practical mind wrestled with the possibility. He'd seen coins before, collectibles at yard sales, a few old pennies tucked in change, But this felt different, substantial, valuable even. But he forced caution into his words. Could be rare, could be nothing. I don't want you building castles out of guesses. Ethan's eyes burned with determination. Then let's find out. We can take it to someone who knows. Michael paused, staring at the single coin resting in his palm. A dull ache rose in his chest. For months, his life had been about surviving the next bill, the next shift at work. And now a glimmer, just a glimmer, suggested there might be something more waiting inside Henry's mystery. He closed his hand around the coin, feeling its weight. Ethan's hopeful gaze tugged at him, a reminder that not everything needed to be dismissed so quickly. All right, Michael said at last, his voice low. We'll see what it's worth. Tomorrow. Ethan broke into a grin, hugging Max tightly. The dog barked as if celebrating with him. Michael looked down at the coin again. For the first time, he couldn't quite push away the thought that maybe, just maybe, this box carried more than faded memories. The next morning, Michael slipped the coin into a small cloth pouch and tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket. He told himself it was nothing more than curiosity driving him into town, but deep down he knew it was more. Ethan's hope had rubbed off on him, stubborn and contagious. Are we really going today? Ethan asked as he bounded down the stairs, backpack already slung over his shoulder. Michael raised an eyebrow. You planning on running off to school with treasure in your bag? Ethan grinned sheepishly. I just want to be ready. Where are we taking it? There's a shop on Main Street, Michael said. Janet's Antiques. She knows more about old things than anyone else in this town. If it has value, she'll tell us. Ethan's eyes sparkled. Then what are we waiting for? They loaded into the truck, Max whining when he realized he wasn't coming. The drive into town was quiet at first. Cornfields gave way to small houses, then to the brick storefronts that lined their modest downtown. Michael parked near the corner, staring at the faded sign, Janet's Antiques and Curiosities. The painted letters curled at the edges, but the windows gleamed with careful polish. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Shelves brimmed with mismatched treasures, porcelain dolls, brass candlesticks, faded photographs. Behind the counter stood Janet herself, a tall woman with silver hair twisted neatly into a bun. Her sharp eyes softened when she recognized Michael. Well, if it isn't one of the Turner boys, she said warmly. Haven't seen you in years. What brings you in? Michael hesitated, pulling the pouch from his pocket. He placed it on the counter and loosened the drawstring. The coin caught the light as he set it gently on the glass. Found this yesterday. Thought you might take a look. Janet leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. The moment her fingers touched the silver, her expression shifted. She turned it over slowly, her breath catching. Where did you get this? She asked, her voice hushed. Michael stiffened. Does that matter? It does if you're asking me what it's worth, Janet replied, eyes never leaving the coin. This is no trinket. This is an 1893 Morgan silver dollar, rare minting, excellent condition considering the years. Depending on the buyer, this could fetch several $1,000s. Ethan let out a gasp loud enough to make the porcelain dolls in the corner seem to shiver. I knew it, Dad, I knew it wasn't junk. Michael's pulse quickened, though he forced calm into his words. Thousands? You're serious? Janet nodded. I've only seen a handful of these in my lifetime. And this one is special. If you found this, there may be more where it came from. Ethan tugged at Michael's sleeve. We have to check the bus again. There could be boxes full of them. Michael felt a strange tug in his chest, a mix of relief, disbelief, and unease. Money like that could change things, pay off debts, fix the roof. Give Ethan opportunities he never thought possible, but he wasn't ready to leap into dreams just yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Michael said firmly, though his eyes flickered back to the coin. It's just one piece. Janet placed it carefully back into his hand. One piece can open a door, Michael. Just make sure you're ready for what's on the other side. The words lingered as father and son left the shop. The autumn air outside felt sharper now, the sounds of Main Street louder. Michael closed his hand around the coin, feeling its weight as though it carried more than silver. Ethan's voice broke the silence, trembling with excitement. Dad, this changes everything. Michael glanced at him, unsure whether to fear or welcome the truth in those words. That evening the Turner yard buzzed with energy. The rusty bus, once just a burden, now sat like a promise waiting to be cracked open. Michael carried a flashlight and a small toolbox, while Ethan followed close behind, practically dragging Max along. The boy's voice brimmed with excitement. "Dad, if there was one coin, there has to be more. Uncle Henry wouldn't hide just one." Michael sighed, but couldn't hide the spark in his own chest. Or maybe it was the only one worth hiding. We won't know until we check. Inside, the air felt colder, damp with the smell of rust and mold. Dust motes swirled in the flashlight beam. Michael pried up more planks, Max sniffing each gap eagerly. Most hid nothing but dirt and debris, old nails, crumpled wrappers, a faded bus ticket from 1975. But then Ethan spotted something wedged behind the driver's seat. "Dad! There, look!" Michael reached in and tugged out a leather pouch stiff with age. The stitching had frayed, and the drawstring nearly disintegrated in his grip. He opened it carefully, revealing a handful of coins that clinked together, their surfaces dull but distinct. Ethan's eyes went wide. More of them. Michael examined one in the flashlight's glow. Another silver dollar, slightly worn but unmistakably old. His pulse quickened. He shook the pouch gently and more coins tumbled into his palm. Not dozens, but enough to suggest Henry had been deliberate in what he left behind. "Unbelievable," Michael murmured. Ethan practically danced. "See? I told you Uncle Henry left us something important." As they explored further, Michael uncovered additional items, an old road atlas with notes scribbled in the margins, faded photographs of towns and roadside diners, and a small leather-bound journal with Henry's name etched inside. The handwriting sprawled across the pages in uneven lines, filled with musings, half-finished thoughts and sketches of places he'd visited. Michael flipped through a few pages, his throat tightening as memories resurfaced. This was Henry, all right, always chasing stories, always collecting pieces of the world no one else noticed. Ethan leaned over his shoulder. "What's he writing about here?" Michael squinted at a passage. "Met a man in Kansas who swore a single coin could carry the history of 1,000 hands. Said it wasn't about the money, it was about the journey it survived." Ethan whispered, almost reverently, "Dad, he wanted you to find this. I know he did." Michael looked at his son, illuminated by the thin beam of light. There was conviction in Ethan's face, a belief that outshone any doubt. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt like they weren't just drifting. They were piecing together something larger, something Henry had meant to pass on. They stayed in the bus for hours, searching every nook. They didn't find treasure chests overflowing with riches, but what they did uncover was enough to build a picture. Henry had been part of a circle of collectors, hunters of rare coins, who valued history as much as profit. The journal hinted at gatherings, coded references to auctions and meetings scattered across the Midwest. By the time they left the bus, the night was deep and the stars sharp against the sky. Ethan carried the pouch of coins clutched to his chest, while Michael held the journal under his arm. Max padded beside them, tail wagging as though he too knew they had uncovered something precious. As they stepped back into the house, Michael caught Ethan's grin. It wasn't just about coins or journals. It was about discovery, about a connection to the past that tied them to Henry in ways Michael hadn't expected. And though he tried to keep his guard up, Michael couldn't deny the truth rising in him. The bus wasn't a burden anymore. It was a doorway. News in a small town traveled faster than wildfire, and Michael should have known their visit to Janet's Antiques wouldn't stay quiet for long. By the following afternoon, whispers followed him as he walked down Main Street. He caught fragments, Turner, coin, worth a fortune, and felt his stomach knot. Ethan, oblivious, skipped beside him, the boy's backpack bouncing with each step. When they returned home, a truck Michael didn't recognize sat parked near his driveway. Leaning against it was Rick Dalton, a man known around town for quick deals and quicker trouble. He straightened when Michael pulled in, a grin spreading across his face. "Michael Turner," Rick drawled, pushing off the truck. "Heard you've been making some interesting discoveries out at your place." Michael's jaw tightened. "Funny, I don't remember inviting you here." Rick smirked, ignoring the bite in Michael's tone. "Come on, no need to be unfriendly. Word is you stumbled onto something Henry left behind. Coins, maybe? Rare ones." Ethan perked up, but Michael shot him a sharp look, silencing him before he could speak. "Whatever I found or didn't find is none of your business." Rick chuckled, taking a step closer. "See, that's where you're wrong. A find like that, it becomes everybody's business once folks start talking, and trust me, people are talking." Michael folded his arms across his chest, then let them talk. Rick tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "You always were stubborn, but let me make you an offer. I've got connections, people who know how to move rare coins quickly. No red tape, no waiting around for auctions. I take them off your hands, you get cash in yours, and nobody has to worry about thieves sniffing around." Michael felt the weight of the journal still tucked inside his house, the pouch of coins hidden in his desk. His gut twisted. "I'm not interested." Rick's grin thinned into something harder. "You might want to think twice. Folks get greedy when they hear about treasure. Better it's with someone who can handle it than with a widower and a kid who don't know what they're holding." Ethan's small hand slipped into Michael's, clutching tight. Michael squared his shoulders, meeting Rick's stare. "If you're worried about thieves, then you should go home and look in your own pockets, because nothing here belongs to you." For a moment, silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then Rick gave a short laugh, though his eyes stayed cold. "Suit yourself, Turner, but don't say I didn't warn you." He climbed back into his truck, the engine growling as he pulled away, dust rising in his wake. Ethan let out a shaky breath. "Dad, was he serious? Do you think someone will try to steal the coins?" Michael crouched, so his eyes were level with Ethan's. "Listen to me. We'll be careful. That's all we can do. And we won't let anyone push us around. Not Rick, not anyone." Max barked from the porch, tail stiff, as if sensing the tension lingering in the air. Michael rose slowly, his mind racing. He'd thought the bus was just a burden, then a mystery, then maybe a gift. But now he realized it had become something else entirely. A target. As the evening settled in, Michael locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and sat with Ethan at the table. The boy tried to distract himself with homework, but his eyes kept darting to the journal, to the pouch that wasn't supposed to exist. Michael reached across the table, steadying his son's restless hands. "We'll get through this, Ethan. Whatever your uncle left us, we'll protect it. Together." And though he said the words with conviction, a sliver of unease wormed into Michael's chest. Greed had a way of changing people. He just didn't know how far it might reach. The morning after Rick Dalton's visit, Michael woke with a pit in his stomach. Sleep had been shallow, restless, full of dreams where strangers pounded on the door and tried to wrench the coins from his hands. He found himself staring at the journal on the dresser, Henry's uneven handwriting etched into his mind. The bus wasn't just an inheritance anymore, it was a responsibility. Over breakfast, Ethan pushed cereal around his bowl, too distracted to eat. "Dad, what if Rick tells other people? What if they come here?" Michael set down his coffee mug, his jaw tight. "That's exactly why we need to figure out where we stand. If these coins really are worth as much as Janet says, then there might be laws about who they belong to." Ethan frowned. "But Uncle Henry left the bus to you. That means the coins are ours, right?" Michael rubbed his temples. "I want to believe that. But inheritance law can get complicated. If Henry didn't spell things out clearly in his will, someone else could claim them." The thought made Ethan's face fall. Like who? Distant relatives, maybe. Cousins, nieces, anyone with a lawyer willing to stir up trouble. Ethan crossed his arms, stubborn. "That's not fair. Uncle Henry wanted us to have them. I can feel it." Michael reached across the table, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "I know, buddy. That's why I'm going to talk to someone today, a lawyer. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Later that afternoon, Michael drove to the nearest law office, a modest building with brick walls and neat blinds. He asked to see Ms. Carter, a woman he remembered from years ago when she had handled paperwork for the sale of his parents' farm. She greeted him with a polite but firm handshake, her eyes sharp behind rimmed glasses. "What brings you in, Michael?" she asked, guiding him into her office. Michael hesitated before pulling the coin from his pocket and setting it on her desk. The silver glinted in the light. Ms. Carter raised an eyebrow, picking it up delicately. "Where did you come across this?" "It was hidden in an old bus," Michael admitted. "A bus my Uncle Henry left me when he passed. At first I thought it was junk, but there was a compartment. Coins, papers, even a journal." Ms. Carter studied him carefully. "And you're wondering if you have the right to keep what you found?" Michael nodded. "I don't want trouble, but I also don't want to lose what Henry meant for me and my son to have." She leaned back, folding her hands. "Legally speaking, inheritance covers the property listed in the will. If Henry left you the bus, anything attached to it usually becomes yours as well. Hidden items inside the bus, unless explicitly excluded, are considered part of that inheritance." Michael's shoulders eased slightly, though tension lingered. "So no one can just come out of nowhere and claim it?" "Ms." Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not so simple. If other relatives suspect there's valuable property, they could contest the will. That doesn't mean they'd win, but it would drag you into court, cost you time and money, and small towns have a way of magnifying disputes." Michael exhaled heavily. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." Her tone softened. "My advice? Keep this quiet until you know the full extent of what you're dealing with. Document everything. Take photos, catalog the coins, safeguard the journal. If this grows into something bigger, you'll need evidence to prove Henry intended it for you." Michael picked up the coin again, turning it between his fingers. It seemed heavier now, not just in weight, but in consequence. "Thank you, Ms. Carter." "I needed clarity." As he left the office, the autumn wind cut across the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of dry leaves. He slid the coin back into his pocket, his thoughts swirling. Henry had left him more than a bus. He'd left him a puzzle tangled in law, greed, and memory. And Michael knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. The week dragged with unease. Every time Michael passed the bus sitting in the yard, he felt both pride and dread. Pride because the discovery had brought life back into Ethan's eyes. Dread because it had also brought whispers, and whispers had a way of turning sharp in small towns. On Tuesday afternoon, Ethan climbed into the truck after school with his shoulders slumped, his face pale. Michael noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, starting the engine. Ethan didn't answer at first. He stared out the window, jaw clenched. Finally he muttered, "The other kids were talking. They said we don't deserve the coins, that you're just going to lose them anyway because we're too poor to keep anything valuable." Michael's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Who said that?" "Doesn't matter," Ethan mumbled. They all laughed. Michael pulled the truck over to the side of the road, turning to face his son. "Look at me." Reluctantly, Ethan met his eyes. Hurt simmered beneath the boy's defiance. "Don't let anyone tell you what we do or don't deserve," Michael said firmly. "Those coins, whatever they're worth, Henry left them to us. That means they're part of our story now." "Nobody else's." Ethan swallowed hard. "But what if they're right? What if we can't keep them?" Michael reached across, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we'll fight to. I don't care how hard it gets. We've already lost enough. We're not losing this." For the rest of the ride home, Ethan stayed quiet, but Michael caught him glancing at the pouch of coins he kept hidden in the glove compartment. The boy's expression softened, though the sting of the day hadn't vanished. That night, bills lay spread across the kitchen table like an accusation. Electricity, mortgage, medical costs that never seemed to end. Michael rubbed his forehead, exhaustion pulling at him. Selling just one of those coins could ease the pressure, maybe even clear months of debt. The thought tempted him, whispering louder with every envelope he opened. He heard Ethan's laughter from the living room, soft, cautious, but real, as he played with Max. That sound reminded Michael why he hadn't sold anything yet. The coins weren't just money. They were connection, possibility, a thread between past and future. Still, he couldn't ignore reality. He muttered under his breath, "How long can I hold this together?" Later, when he tucked Ethan into bed, the boy asked in a small voice, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Michael sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair back from Ethan's forehead. "We're going to be okay. I don't know how yet, but we will. Even if people try to take the coins? Even then, Michael said, his voice steadier than he felt. Because we've got something no one else does. Ethan tilted his head. What's that? Michael forced a smile. Each other. And Max, of course. The dog thumped his tail in agreement, curled at Ethan's feet. The boy smiled faintly, finally closing his eyes. Michael lingered a moment, watching his son breathe evenly. He wished he could bottle that innocence, shield it from the weight pressing on their lives. The world felt heavier than ever, but Michael carried it because he had no other choice. When he returned to the kitchen, he placed the pouch of coins on the table and stared at it. The silver glinted faintly in the lamplight, silent but loud with promise. It was both salvation and threat, depending on how he chose to use it. Michael leaned back in his chair, shoulders sagging. For the first time, he wondered not just what the coins were worth, but what price they might demand from him in return. The journal had sat unopened for days, tucked on a shelf where Michael could avoid it. He told himself there wasn't time to dig into Henry's ramblings, that the coins were the only thing that mattered. But on a rainy Saturday, when the sky hung low and grey, Ethan pulled the leather-bound book into his lap and started flipping through the pages. "Dad," he called from the couch, "you need to read this." Michael looked up from the stack of bills he was wrestling with. "What's in it?" "Stuff about the coins, stuff about you." That caught Michael's attention. He crossed the room, took the journal from Ethan, and sat down heavily. The leather smelled faintly of tobacco and dust, and the ink had bled in places from years of wear. Henry's handwriting sprawled in uneven loops, sometimes rushed, sometimes careful. Michael skimmed until his eyes froze on a passage dated nearly a decade earlier. "I don't have much to leave behind. No house, no savings. Just this bus and the pieces of history I've gathered along the road. But maybe that's enough. Michael will understand. He's the only one who ever listened when I told stories no one else believed in. He knows life is more than just paying bills." Michael's throat tightened. He kept reading. "The boy will need something to hold on to. He'll lose more than he should, too early. I can feel it. When that happens, I hope this bus reminds him that journeys are worth more than destinations. If he finds the coins, they're his. Not to hoard, but to use, to build, to travel, to show Ethan the world I never finished exploring." Michael stopped, his eyes stinging. He closed the journal halfway, pressing it against his leg. Ethan stared at him with wide, searching eyes. "What did it say?" the boy whispered. Michael struggled to find his voice. It said Henry wanted us to have the coins, not just to keep them, but to use them. He wanted us to see the world the way he did." Ethan's face lit up. "So he really left them for us? He trusted you?" Michael nodded slowly, though his chest felt heavy. "He did. He believed I'd know what to do with them. And he was right about one thing. I've been so caught up in surviving that I forgot about living." Ethan leaned closer, eyes shining. "Does that mean we'll travel, like he wanted? We could fix the bus, go on adventures?" Michael let out a shaky laugh. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but maybe we can start thinking about it. One step at a time." He flipped further through the journal, finding maps sketched in pencil, notes about hidden compartments in the bus, even lists of coin conventions Henry had once attended. Each page told the story of a man who had been restless, yes, but also deliberate. Henry hadn't been drifting aimlessly. He had been leaving a trail. Michael closed the book at last, holding it like something fragile. "Your uncle wasn't just eccentric. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted this to find us, Ethan, not anyone else." Ethan wrapped his arms around Max, grinning so wide it almost erased the weeks of worry. "Then we can't let anyone take it away. We have to protect it, and use it like he wanted." Michael looked at his son, the boy's hope burning brighter than the rain tapping against the windows. For the first time, Michael allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by scarcity, but by possibility. The bus wasn't just a rusting shell anymore. It was a vessel, carrying Henry's last message. Life was meant to be lived, not merely endured. The night was still, heavy with the smell of damp earth after an evening rain. Michael had just finished locking up the house when Max's sharp bark cut through the quiet. At first he thought it was just a rabbit darting across the yard, but then Max barked again, louder, frantic, the sound of warning. Michael grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, heart pounding. The beam cut across the yard and landed on the silhouette of a man near the bus. The glint of metal caught the light, crowbar in hand. "Hey!" Michael shouted, his voice harsher than he expected. The figure froze, then turned. It was Rick Dalton. His face twisted with annoyance at being caught, but he didn't back away. Instead, he stepped closer to the bus door as though daring Michael to stop him. "You shouldn't have ignored me, Turner," Rick sneered. "Now look where we are. You've got something valuable, and you don't even know what to do with it. Me, I know exactly how to handle it." Michael tightened his grip on the flashlight, his pulse racing. "Get away from the bus, Rick." Now, Ethan appeared at the doorway, voice trembling. "Dad, what's happening?" "Stay inside," Michael barked, never taking his eyes off Rick. Rick gave a humorless laugh. "Relax, kid. I'm just here to make sure your old man doesn't waste what he's sitting on. You think you can protect that stash? People will come for it. You'll lose it all." "Better it's with me." Max lunged forward, teeth bared, growling deep in his throat. Rick hesitated, taking a step back. "Call off the dog, Turner." Michael's voice was steady now, fueled by something deeper than fear. "You're trespassing. That makes you a thief. And I won't let a thief near what my uncle left us." Rick's smirk faltered. "You really think you can keep me out?" "One man, one mutt, and a pile of coins. Sooner or later someone stronger will come knocking." Michael took a step forward, flashlight beam glaring into Rick's eyes. "Maybe. But tonight, you're the one standing on my land, breaking into my property. And I'm not the kind of man who lets people push his family around." For a moment, neither moved. The rain dripping from the trees was the only sound, except for Max's growl. Then headlights swung across the yard, a sheriff's cruiser rolling slowly up the drive. Rick cursed under his breath. "You called them?" Michael shook his head. "Didn't have to. Guess luck's on my side tonight." The cruiser stopped and Sheriff Daniels stepped out, hand resting on his holster. "Evening, gentlemen." "Mind telling me why I'm looking at one man with a crowbar on another man's property?" Rick stammered, trying to explain, but the sheriff wasn't interested. Within minutes, Rick was in the back of the cruiser, fuming as the red taillights disappeared down the road. Ethan rushed out, throwing his arms around Michael. "I was so scared, Dad." Michael hugged him tightly, his own breath uneven. "It's okay, he's gone, we're safe." Max barked once, proud and protective, before circling the bus as though sealing it off from danger. Michael looked at the rusty vehicle, its shadow looming in the moonlight. It wasn't just a bus anymore. It was a test of what he was willing to fight for, of how far he would go to protect the legacy Henry had entrusted to him. And tonight, he'd proven to himself that he was strong enough to face it. The morning after Rick's arrest, the Turners' yard felt lighter. The bus stood in its usual place, but now it looked less like a relic and more like a guardian, a symbol of what they had defended. Michael poured himself a cup of coffee, gazing at the rising sun spilling golden light over the roof of the old vehicle. For the first time in weeks, he felt a quiet steadiness in his chest. Ethan burst through the door with Max bounding after him. "Dad, can we start working on the bus today? Please? Uncle Henry wanted us to use it, not just stare at it." Michael chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "We'll need help if we're going to turn that thing into something worth driving. It's not a weekend project." "But maybe it's time to start." True to his word, Michael called Harvey at the mechanic shop. By afternoon, Harvey pulled into the yard, wiping grease off his hands as he surveyed the bus with a long whistle. "Well, I'll be," Harvey muttered. "You're really going to restore this beast?" Michael shrugged. "I don't know about restore, but I want it running." "Strong enough to take us somewhere new?" Harvey grinned. "It'll take work, but if you're serious, I'll lend a hand. Always did have a soft spot for projects with stories behind them." Soon, neighbors began drifting over, curiosity drawing them close. Janet arrived carrying a box of old maps and postcards, insisting they'd need them when the bus finally hit the road. Mrs. Whitaker from next door brought sandwiches, saying no crew could work on empty stomachs. Ethan raced between them all, handing Harvey tools, showing Janet the journal, laughing as Max chased after kids who wandered into the yard. The house, once weighed down by grief and silence, filled with voices and movement. Michael stood back for a moment, taking it in. It struck him how quickly the community had rallied, not for the coins, not for greed, but for the idea of breathing new life into something left behind. By evening, Harvey had stripped down part of the engine, muttering about what could be salvaged. Janet traced routes on a map, suggesting places Henry might have wanted them to visit. Ethan sat cross-legged in the grass, polishing one of the silver coins with the careful attention of a curator. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, holding the coin up to the fading light, "when we fix the bus, where will we go first?" Michael crouched beside him, watching the silver catch the last rays of sunset. "I don't know yet. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we just start somewhere and let the road show us where to end up." Ethan grinned, eyes full of wonder. "Just like Uncle Henry." Michael smiled, though his voice carried more weight. "Maybe better than Henry. Because this time, we won't just collect memories. We'll make them together." The bus loomed behind them, its rusted frame still scarred but no longer forgotten. With each bolt tightened, each map unfolded, it was being transformed into more than a machine. It was becoming a vessel of renewal, carrying not just Henry's legacy, but the strength of a father and son finding their way forward. As the stars began to prick the sky, Michael felt something he hadn't in a long time: anticipation. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time uncertainty felt like freedom. The bus was no longer just a gift from the past. It was a doorway to the future. Weeks later, the bus no longer looked like the ghost it once was. Its rusted frame had been sanded, its paint touched with new life, its engine coaxed into a low, steady rumble. It wasn't perfect, far from the gleaming vehicles Michael saw on the highway, but it was theirs. Every dent carried memory, every repaired seam spoke of effort and care. On the morning of their first journey, Michael stood by the driver's seat, running his hand across the worn steering wheel. Ethan sat near the window, backpack stuffed with notebooks, snacks, and the journal that had started it all. Max lay stretched out on the floor, tail wagging lazily, as though he understood that this was no ordinary ride. Ethan leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "Where to first?" Michael smiled faintly. "Wherever the road takes us." As the bus groaned forward, gravel crunching beneath its tires, Michael felt a swell in his chest. For so long, life had been about surviving each day, about making it to tomorrow without breaking. But now, for the first time in years, he felt like he and Ethan were stepping into tomorrow with purpose. The road rolled ahead, lined with fields and distant hills. Ethan opened the journal, tracing his finger along Henry's notes. "Dad, look." He circled a diner in Nebraska. "Says they made the best peach pie he'd ever had. Can we go there?" Michael chuckled. Peach pie sounds like a good place to start. They laughed together, and for a moment, the weight of grief lifted, replaced by the hum of possibility. As they drove, Michael thought about Henry, about a man who had seemed reckless, scattered, always chasing something just out of reach. Yet in his own way, Henry had known what mattered. He had left them more than coins, more than a bus. He had left them a reminder that life wasn't about what you lost, but what you dared to seek. Ethan rested his head against the window, watching the fields blur past. "I think Mom would like this," he said softly. Michael's throat tightened, but he managed a steady voice. "I think she would too." Silence settled between them, not heavy but gentle, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. By afternoon, they stopped at a roadside park. Ethan and Max ran through the grass while Michael sat on a bench, breathing in the crisp air. For the first time in years, he wasn't weighed down by what he lacked. He was filled by what he had: a son who still believed in wonder, a loyal dog, and the open road. When Ethan came back, out of breath and grinning, Michael pulled him close. "You know," he said, "this bus may not look like much to other people, but to us, it's everything. It's a start." Ethan nodded fiercely. "It's our adventure." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth that spread deeper than the autumn sun. His uncle's legacy had begun in rust and mystery, but it had bloomed into something greater, a future worth chasing. As they climbed back into the bus, Michael glanced at his son, then at the horizon ahead. He pressed the accelerator, the engine answering with determination. Their journey was just beginning. And before we close this chapter, if you've been moved by Michael and Ethan's story, by how hope can rise even from the rustiest places, make sure to subscribe to the channel. More stories like this await, stories of resilience, discovery, and second chances. And don't forget, there's another story waiting for you right now. Click on the suggested video on your screen and continue the adventure with us, because sometimes the road ahead holds more than we ever imagined.